The room was packed, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Rows of cameras lined the back wall, their lenses locked onto the podium where Karoline Leavitt stood, poised and unshaken. She had been here before, faced tough crowds, handled loaded questions, and walked away unscathed. But today felt different. There was something in the air, a kind of unspoken tension humming beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. She adjusted the microphone, scanning the sea of reporters, each of them hungry for a headline. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started." Immediately, hands shot up. Karoline pointed toward a familiar face, a journalist from a major network, someone she knew would open with policy rather than controversy. The first question was straightforward: tax cuts. She delivered a polished response, controlled, precise. Another question followed, this time on education reform. Again, she answered smoothly, balancing facts with the kind of firm but diplomatic tone that came with the job. But then it happened. A voice cut through the room, sharper than the rest. "Ms. Leavitt, let's talk about the real issue here." Karoline didn't need to look to know who it was. Her, the liberal reporter, aggressive, relentless, always looking for the angle that would go viral. She was leaning forward, smirking, pen tapping rhythmically against her notepad like a slow, deliberate drum roll before the attack. Karoline stayed composed. "Go ahead." The reporter wasted no time. "Do you think this administration's policies are intentionally designed to suppress certain communities? Because the data suggests—" Karoline held up a hand, cutting her off. "I've answered that question before. This administration is focused on policies that benefit all Americans. If you'd like to discuss today's topic, I'm happy to continue." The reporter smirked. She wasn't backing down. "Well, you didn't actually answer." "I did answer," Karoline interrupted, her tone firm but controlled. For a moment, the room settled. But then, another interruption. "I just don't see why you're avoiding it," the reporter pressed, her voice slicing through the air. The room shifted. The other journalists exchanged glances, some intrigued, others uneasy. They could feel it now, the tension tightening like an elastic band just before the snap. Karoline exhaled slowly. She knew exactly what this was. And she knew it was only the beginning. The air in the briefing room grew heavier, charged with an intensity that made even the seasoned journalists shift in their seats. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression, every subtle shift in body language. Karoline held her ground, her hands resting lightly on the podium, but inside she could feel it. The reporter wasn't just asking a question. She was setting a trap. "I'm not avoiding anything," Karoline said, her voice even. "I'm staying on topic. If you have a question relevant to today's briefing, I'll gladly answer. If not, I'll be moving on." But the reporter wasn't finished. She leaned in, her smirk widening just slightly, sensing an opportunity. "So, that's a no comment then?" A few quiet gasps rippled through the room. Reporters exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this tactic before: push, 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 until the moment cracked under pressure. The energy in the room shifted again, tightening like a coiled spring. Karoline inhaled through her nose, exhaling slowly, keeping her composure. "I've answered your question," she said, then gestured to another journalist in the back. But the moment the next reporter opened his mouth, the same voice cut through, sharp, insistent. "Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer?" For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed Karoline's face. Not much, just a brief tightening around the eyes. But it was enough. The cameras caught it, the journalists noticed, and the moment turned from a briefing into a spectacle. She knew exactly what was happening. The reporter wasn't here for answers. She was here for a moment, something that would be clipped, shared, and dissected by every media outlet within the next hour. Karoline adjusted her stance, placing both hands firmly on the podium. She wasn't going to let that happen. But the reporter had no intention of stopping, and the tension in the room was about to break. The tension in the room was suffocating. Reporters shifted in their seats, some scribbling furiously, others just watching, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion on Karoline's face. She knew what was happening. This wasn't a press briefing anymore. It was a staged confrontation. Karoline exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "I don't believe in wasting anyone's time," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "If you have a new question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'd like to give others a chance." The reporter smirked, tapping her pen against the table in slow, deliberate beats. "Sure. New question?" she said, voice dripping with false politeness. "Why is this administration so afraid of transparency?" The words hit the room like a grenade. A few quiet gasps, a ripple of murmurs. Some reporters scribbled notes, sensing the moment turning into something bigger. Others exchanged glances, uneasy with how far this was going. Karoline blinked once, measured. She knew this tactic. She had seen it before. Bait them into losing their composure, force them into a viral moment. She didn't take the bait. Instead, she smiled, but not the warm, diplomatic smile she had used earlier. This was something else. A smile that said, "I see exactly what you're doing." "Transparency," she repeated, letting the word settle. "That's exactly what this administration stands for. But what you're doing isn't about transparency. It's about theatrics." The air in the room shifted. The smirk on the reporter's face faltered. Just slightly, but Karoline saw it. Others did too. A veteran journalist seated near the back muttered to his colleague, "This isn't journalism, this is performance art." Karoline caught that too. The reporter, realizing she was losing control of the moment, doubled down. "So just to be clear," she started, but Karoline didn't let her finish. "I am being clear," Karoline said, her voice firm. "This press conference is not about you." The room went dead silent. The reporter's smirk was gone now. For the first time, she hesitated. But Karoline wasn't done. And what happened next would change everything. A charged silence filled the room. The weight of Karoline's last words still hung in the air, thick and unshakable. The reporter's smirk had faded, replaced by something harder, determination. She wasn't done. Not yet. "So, just to be clear," the reporter said again, voice sharp, eyes narrowing like a predator sensing weakness. "Are you refusing to answer because you can't, or because you don't want to?" A few reporters inhaled sharply, bracing for impact. Karoline exhaled, slow and measured, but inside she could feel it. The push, the deliberate attempt to provoke her into an outburst that would be played on a loop for the next week. This wasn't about information. It wasn't about transparency. It was about control. She straightened, gripping the podium, her expression unreadable. "I'm refusing to play a game," she said, voice even but edged with something final. "This press conference is not about you." The reporter leaned back, arms crossed, the smirk returning. "Right," she said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. "Because expecting transparency is a game?" This time it wasn't just a ripple. Voices stirred, reporters whispered. The energy in the room snapped from tense anticipation to something else entirely. Karoline saw it happening, the moment shifting, the cameras rolling, the viral headlines already writing themselves. She had two choices: engage and give the reporter exactly what she wanted, or shut it down completely. Karoline's jaw tightened. Her patience had run out. She glanced to the side of the room. Secure. The shift in her gaze was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the moment it happened, the room knew. The game was over. And just like that, everything changed. The tension in the room snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. Reporters tensed in their seats, pens frozen mid-air, cameras zooming in, waiting for the inevitable escalation. They had seen confrontations before, but this felt different. It felt personal. Karoline's glance toward security had been quick, almost imperceptible, but the meaning was clear. The reporter caught it too. Her smirk flickered. Just for a moment, but she masked it quickly, doubling down. "You're seriously doing this?" she asked, her voice lower now, sharper, slicing through the room like a knife. Karoline didn't answer. She didn't need to. A uniformed security officer stationed by the door took a slow, deliberate step forward. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. The message was clear. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a line in the sand. The room shifted. Journalists gripped their notepads a little tighter. Some looked away, pretending to scribble notes. Others leaned forward, waiting to see how far this would go. The reporter could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the choice hanging in the air. She could make them remove her, force a viral, dramatic exit, or she could leave on her own terms, spin it her way. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face. Then, slowly, she reached for her notepad and stood. "This is a disgrace," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough to be picked up by the mics. Then, with one last calculated jab, she turned toward the cameras. "You can kick me out, but you can't silence the truth." The door shut behind her. For a second, the room remained frozen. Then, chaos. A flurry of whispers, pens scratching furiously. The click of camera shutters firing like gunshots. Karoline didn't react. She simply adjusted the microphone, her grip steady. She had won this round. Or had she? Because outside that door, the real storm was already brewing. The door had barely closed behind the reporter when the room erupted. The press, still reeling from what had just unfolded, whispered among themselves, some furiously scribbling notes, others typing away on their phones, sending the story out into the world before the dust had even settled. The cameras were still rolling, capturing the raw energy of the moment, the tension, the disbelief, the weight of what had just happened. Then, from the back of the room, a voice cut through the noise. "Karoline, do you think this was the right decision?" The words landed like a hammer. The remaining reporters fell silent, all eyes snapping back to the podium. Karoline met the journalist's gaze, unwavering. She knew this was the moment that would define the narrative. One wrong move, one misstep, and the headlines would write themselves. "Silencing the press. Leavitt shuts down journalism." She straightened, her voice steady. "I think it was necessary." Another voice, this time sharper, cutting. "You don't think this'll backfire?" Karoline already knew the answer. Of course it would. By the time she left the room, the internet would already be flooded with clips. The headlines were inevitable. The outrage machine had already been set in motion. But that wasn't her concern. She scanned the room once more. "We're here to have discussions, not disruptions. If anyone else has real questions, I'm happy to answer them." A pause. Then, slowly, a hand went up. The press conference continued. But outside these... By the time Karoline stepped off the podium, her phone was already buzzing. The chaos inside the briefing room was nothing compared to what was happening outside. Staff members hovered near the hallway, their faces tense, eyes glued to their screens. She didn't need to check her notifications to know what was happening. The clip was already spreading. The narrative was being written in real time. One of her aides rushed up, phone in hand. "It's trending. Silencing the press is picking up steam." Karoline exhaled sharply. "Of course it is." The aide hesitated. "The major networks are running with it. Some are just reporting the facts, but others..." She scrolled, scanning the headlines. "Some are framing it as you shutting down free speech." Karoline let out a dry laugh. "Free speech," she repeated, shaking her head. She wasn't speaking truth. She was performing. The aide nodded grimly. "Doesn't matter, that's not how it's being framed." Karoline knew how this game worked. The truth was irrelevant. The narrative had already taken on a life of its own. She glanced toward the windows. Outside, reporters had already begun gathering, their cameras aimed at the entrance, waiting for her next move. She had a choice: stay quiet and let the moment spiral, or get ahead of it before it hardened into an irreversible headline. Her jaw tightened. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Walls, the real battle had already begun. Karoline stepped into her office, shutting the door behind her, but the noise followed. The muffled voices of aides discussing damage control, the hum of urgent phone calls, the faint, distant sound of reporters shouting questions outside. She had been through political storms before, but this was a different beast. An aide, still glued to her phone, looked up the second Karoline sat down. "She's already leaning into it," she said grimly. "She just did a live interview calling it a chilling moment for press freedom." She scrolled, eyes flicking over the screen. "She's getting booked on every major network." Of course she was. Karoline leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The move had been calculated from the start. The reporter had pushed, prodded, and when she got the reaction she wanted, she played the victim. The moment she walked out of that briefing room, she wasn't a journalist anymore, she was a story. Another aide hurried in, a phone in one hand, a tablet in the other. "We've got a decision to make," he said quickly. "Do we respond now or let it run its course?" Karoline already knew the answer. Letting it go wasn't an option. "What's our strongest play?" she asked. The first aide hesitated. "We could release the full, unedited footage before her version gets too much traction. Let people see how many times you answered before security stepped in." Karoline considered it. It was the smart move. No dramatic spin, no defensive scrambling, just the facts. A direct counter to the selective editing that would soon flood social media. The second aide nodded. "If we act fast, we frame this as transparency, not damage control." Karoline's eyes flicked to her own phone, notifications still rolling in at a relentless pace. She could already predict the cable news segments, the op-eds, the social media discourse. The networks would take sides, the internet would erupt, and somewhere in the noise, the truth would be buried. She tapped her fingers against the desk. "Release the full footage," she said finally. The aides moved quickly, drafting a statement, queuing up the video. Within minutes, the clip was uploaded. A clean, unedited record of the exchange. No dramatic commentary, no embellishments, just a simple caption. "Watch for yourself. The full exchange between Karoline Leavitt and a reporter at today's press conference." Karoline sat back, watching as the numbers ticked upward. Thousands of views in minutes, comments flooding in. The spin was already in motion, but now at least the facts were out there. Her phone buzzed, an incoming message from a close ally in the media. "Smart move. This takes the wind out of their sails." Maybe, but she wasn't naive enough to think this was over. She clicked on one of the network broadcasts. The reporter was seated in a dimly lit studio, her brows furrowed in righteous indignation. "I was simply doing my job," she told the anchor. "I was asking tough but necessary questions, and instead of addressing them, I was removed. That should worry everyone, regardless of political affiliation." Karoline rolled her eyes. Predictable. The anchor nodded solemnly. "Did you feel threatened?" The reporter sighed dramatically. "Not physically, no. But professionally, absolutely. This is an attack on journalism itself." Karoline locked her phone screen. The facts were out there, but that didn't mean people would accept them. Her aide peeked into the office. "You're going to want to see this." Karoline followed her to the hallway, where staff had gathered around a TV. The conservative network had picked up the story, but with a very different angle. The host played the full clip Karoline had released, pausing at key moments. "She interrupts over and over," the host said, shaking his head. "This wasn't journalism, this was grandstanding." The panelists nodded in agreement. "This was a setup," one said. "She wanted to be removed. Push until she gets kicked out, then cry censorship." The host turned back to the camera. "Here's the reality. Karoline Leavitt didn't shut down the press. She shut down an activist posing as a journalist." Karoline crossed her arms. The split was clear. On one side, mainstream outlets painting her as an authoritarian, shutting down free speech. On the other, conservative voices calling it a masterclass in handling a media trap. Her aide glanced at her. "This is going to be a long week." Karoline smirked. "Yeah, but at least now the truth is out there." The question was, who would believe it? In life, challenges will come. How you respond defines you. There will be times when you are placed in difficult situations, whether it's a heated debate, a tense meeting, or even a public confrontation like the one Karoline Leavitt experienced. Here are key lessons to help you maintain your stance and take control of the situation. Composure is your strongest weapon. When provoked, the instinctive reaction is often to lose your temper or respond aggressively. However, as Karoline demonstrated, staying calm not only helps you maintain control, but also deprives your opponent of their advantage. If someone is trying to push you into a difficult position, take a deep breath, keep your voice steady, and respond strategically. Not every question deserves an answer. Not everyone who asks a question genuinely wants an answer. Some simply want to provoke you or create a moment to exploit. Learn to recognize leading or manipulative questions, and don't hesitate to refuse to play by their rules. If a conversation is being steered unfairly, take control and redirect it in a way that benefits you. Truth doesn't win on its own. You must defend it. Just as Karoline did when she released the full video to counter misinformation, you too must actively protect your views and reputation. In an era where information can be easily distorted, ensure that what you say is clear, transparent, and difficult to misrepresent. You can't control how others perceive you, but you can control your response. No matter what Karoline did, there were always people who criticized her. Instead of worrying about that, she focused on controlling her message. In life, there will always be opposition, but rather than trying to please everyone, focus on maintaining integrity and staying true to your purpose. When challenged, see it as an opportunity to prove your strength. Difficult moments are not failures. They are opportunities to assert your position. If you remain steadfast and unshaken under pressure, you won't just overcome the challenge, you will earn the respect of those around you. Confidence and control are more than just words. They're in your attitude. Ultimately, your ability to control a conversation isn't just about what you say, but how you say it. When you remain calm and decisive, you don't just control your narrative, you control how the world perceives you.